What if a 5-year-old girl walked into a job interview and changed an entire company? Not with a resume, but with courage, drawings, and a message no adult had dared to say out loud. This is the story of how empathy slipped through the back door and redefined what success really means. The boardroom at Ross Enterprises stood in cold contrast to the city, buzzing just beyond its tall, spotless windows. It was the kind of room where people rehearsed their dreams in polished phrases, wearing their best suits and carefully constructed expressions. On that Tuesday morning, everything was exactly as it always was, silent, pristine, powerful. The long walnut table gleamed under the soft ceiling lights, and the air carried the faint scent of espresso and ambition. Andrew Ross, the company's founder and CEO, stood at the head of the table, reviewing notes for the next candidate. He wore a perfectly tailored dark gray suit and the kind of expression that rarely gave anything away. His assistants moved efficiently in the background, preparing for the third interview of the day. Everything was on schedule. Everything was under control, until the elevator doors opened, and everything changed. Small footsteps echoed awkwardly across the marble floor. At first, no one looked up. No one expected anything unusual, but then a voice, soft, uncertain, broke the corporate silence. "Excuse me, is this where the interview is?" Heads turned slowly, puzzled. Standing at the door was a little girl, no more than 5 years old. Brown curls framed her round face, and her oversized red backpack hung awkwardly off her tiny shoulders. Her dress was slightly wrinkled, her socks didn't match, but her eyes, deep hazel and full of purpose, scanned the room like she belonged there. Andrew raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was some mistake or an elaborate joke. One of his assistants, Danielle, stepped forward. "Sweetheart, are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl held her backpack strapped tightly and shook her head. "I'm not lost. I'm here for the job interview." A few quiet gasps rippled through the room. A security guard, alerted by the front desk, approached from the hallway, but Andrew raised a hand to stop him. Something about this moment was too unexpected, too real, to dismiss so quickly. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "What's your name?" Sarah Martin." He recognized the last name. Helen Martin, one of the scheduled candidates, mid-30s, solide résumé. But she hadn't shown up. Her interview was 5 minutes ago. Andrew glanced at Danielle, then back at the girl. "Sarah, did your mom send you here?" Sarah hesitated, then stepped forward and reached into her backpack. "She didn't want me to, but I had to come. She's sick. She couldn't get out of bed this morning." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't break eye contact. "I took the number 4 bus. I know the stop. She showed me once." I remembered. The room, usually filled with strategy, talks and performance reviews, was now frozen in disbelief. Not in mockery, but in awe. No one quite knew what to say. Not even Andrew. Sarah stepped closer and placed a worn spiral notebook on the polished table. Its edges were bent. A unicorn sticker peeled off the cover. "This is my mom's resume, but it's better than the one on the computer." Andrew opened the notebook slowly. Page after page was filled with childlike drawings. Crayon sketches of a woman washing dishes in a restaurant, helping elderly people, cleaning homes, taking care of kids. Each picture had handwritten. In captions in big block letters, "My mom working late. My mom helping someone who can't walk. My mom fixing things even when she's tired." It wasn't a resume. It was a testament to perseverance, to love, to survival. Andrew felt his throat tighten. He'd reviewed thousands of resumes in his career, but never one like this. Did your mom know you were coming here?" he asked, his voice softer now. "She told me she had to cancel. She cried a lot. I heard her on the phone last night, begging them not to evict us. She thought I was asleep." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I thought if I came and told you myself, maybe you'd give her a chance." Andrew looked down again at the notebook. One drawing showed Sarah holding her mom's hand outside, a building labeled Ross Enterprises. A rainbow hovered above them. Something broke inside him. He turned to Danielle. "Clear the room." "Sir?" "Everyone, please just give us a moment." The assistants hesitated but obeyed. The guards stepped back. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. leaving only Andrew and Sarah in the vast boardroom. He slowly walked to a chair and sat, motioning for her to take the seat across from him. "I don't think I've ever done a job interview with someone under 6, he said, almost amused. "I'm 5.5, she corrected very seriously. Andrew chuckled despite himself. Then more sincerely, "What you did today was incredibly brave." Sarah stared at her shoes. "I just didn't want us to get kicked out again." That word "again" hit hard. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. The weight behind it was enough. There were 1,000 policies he was supposed to follow, 1,000 reasons to call someone else. But Andrew Ross, a man who built his empire on rules and results, found himself completely disarmed by a child with a backpack full of drawings and a heart full of hope. And yet something in him shifted. This wasn't a stunt. It wasn't manipulation. It was a little girl sitting where her mother was supposed to sit, trying to hold her world together with crayons. He leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell me more about your mom? What kind of person is she?" Sarah nodded. "She's tired a lot, but she's strong and funny. She used to sing when we walked to the store, even when we didn't have money to buy anything. She helps everyone, even when she's hurting. She never stops trying." She paused. Then, almost in a whisper, "But I think she's starting to lose hope." Andrew exhaled slowly. There are moments in life that don't fit on a spreadsheet, that no business degree prepares you for. And this was one of them. He looked at the notebook, then at Sarah, then at the empty chair next to her. He had a decision to make, but not the one everyone expected. And for once, he wasn't going to let numbers decide. He was going to listen. The silence in the boardroom had changed. It was no longer empty. It was full of a question Sarah hadn't spoken, but that echoed in every corner. "Will you help us, or will you look away?" Andrew remained seated across from her, fingers lightly brushing the edges of one of the drawings. He had once believed leadership was about clarity, detachment, leaving emotion outside the room. But now, he couldn't look away from the quiet intensity in Sarah's eyes. She sat straight in the oversized leather chair, her feet swinging above the floor. She pulled out a small thermos and carefully unscrewed the lid. "Would you like some apple juice?" "I brought extra. My mom says it's rude to drink without offering." Andrew blinked. "Thank you, Sarah, but I'm okay." She nodded and took a sip herself. Her hands trembled from the weight of the morning, but she never looked away. It was like she hadn't practiced what to say. She had just brought her heart with her. "My mom didn't want me to come," she finally said. "She told me to stay home. But I know where we keep the spare change." And I remembered the bus route from when we went to see Christmas lights. Andrew tilted his head, both impressed and concerned. "You did all this on your own?" Sarah nodded. "I left a note. I wrote, 'Went to get you a job. Love, Sarah.'" No arrogance in her voice, only love, the kind that sends a child across a city and up 37 floors to find a miracle. "I'm not supposed to go out alone," she added. "But sometimes you do the wrong thing, if it helps someone you love." Andrew felt something crumble inside him, a piece of himself he hadn't realized was still holding on. "Do you know why your mom wanted this job?" he asked. "She said it was steady," Sarah answered immediately. "She said it came with benefits." That's the word. Benefits mean the doctor, the dentist, and maybe one day, a home we don't have to leave. She looked down, fiddling with the zipper on her backpack. "We've been in 3 places this year. Once I had to sleep in the bathtub. There weren't enough beds." Andrew leaned back, his expression unreadable, but his heart undone. "She said this job could fix things," Sarah continued, "that we might not get everything back, but we could start again." She wanted to be strong again, not just tired. The way she said again, it lingered. It meant Helen had once been vibrant, whole, happy. "She used to sing," Sarah whispered, "before she got really sick. Before Dad left." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Your dad, is he around?" "No." Her tone was flat. "He left last spring. He said he had dreams. But Mom said she already had one, me." Andrew felt the sting behind his eyes. He hadn't cried in years. "Do you like drawing?" he asked. Sarah smiled, really smiled, for the first time. "It helps me remember good things." Sometimes my mom looks really tired, but when I draw her, I make her smiling. Maybe she'll remember how." There was something sacred in that answer. Andrew stood and walked to the window. Outside, New York kept moving. Cars, horns, people with stories no one noticed. He turned back. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why did you come here, really?" She looked straight at him. Her voice didn't shake this time. "Because people don't listen when moms cry. But they listen when something surprising happens, I thought. Maybe if I came instead, you'd listen." And he had. That was the hardest part, because it was true. Sarah hadn't just cracked the surface of Ross Enterprises. She had cracked something inside Andrew Ross himself, a man who hadn't sat with a 5-year-old since his niece's birthday party 6 years ago. A man who had forgotten how much power there was in kindness. He returned to his chair. "I want to meet your mom," he said finally. Sarah looked stunned. "You do?" "Yes, today, if she's feeling up for it. She's really sick." "I won't stay long. I just want to talk." Sarah clutched the notebook tightly. "Okay, I'll give you our address. But it's not fancy. I'm not looking for fancy." Another silence, but this time it was filled with something new, hope. Andrew stood and reached across the table. Sarah hesitated, then shook his hand solemnly. "I'll tell her to make tea," she said. "If she can. I'll bring something warm. For both of you. Deal? Deal?" And so they stood at the elevator. A powerful man and a little girl with unmatched socks and enormous courage. Before the doors closed, she pulled out one last folded paper, a drawing of a man in a suit, a woman and a little girl under a bright sun. "I drew this last night," she said, "just in case." Andrew took it carefully. "Thank you, Sarah," he said quietly. What he didn't say, not yet, was that this morning, what should have been just another interview, had become the beginning of something far more important. The ride to Sarah's home felt longer than it was. Traffic crawled through the early afternoon haze. But for Andrew Ross, the real congestion was inside his own mind. Every red light pulled up a memory from the morning. Sarah's determined little voice, her mismatched socks, the soft click of her thermos. But above all, it was that notebook, that fragile collection of drawings, innocent yet piercing, that refused to leave him alone. He held it on his lap as the car turned, onto a narrow side street lined with aging buildings. A few windows were cracked open despite the chill, letting out the sounds of TV sets and crying babies. The sidewalks were cracked, worn down by years of stories. It was a world far from the marble, floors of Ross Enterprises, but alive in a way that those towers never were. He recognized the iron gate from one of Sarah's drawings. In her version, it was surrounded by sunflowers. In reality, it was rusted and leaning. The car stopped. "Wait here," Andrew told his driver and stepped out. The notebook still in his hand, the stairwell creaked under the weight of his polished shoes. Every step down felt like stepping into truth, not poverty, but reality. The smell of mildew and fried food clung to the air. "Apartment 3B, he knocked gently. Nothing at first. Then slow, uneven footsteps. The door cracked open just an inch. A woman appeared, frail, pale. Her dark hair pulled into a loose bun. Her eyes were tired but sharp, wary, protective. "Yes?" Andrew cleared his throat. "Helen Martin?" Her gaze flicked to the notebook in his hands, then over his shoulder, searching for Sarah. Before she could speak, a familiar little voice cut in. "Mom, this is Mr. Ross. He's from the interview." Helen blinked. "What?" "Sarah, I told you not to." "I know," Sarah said softer. "But I had to try." Andrew raised a calming hand. "Ms. Martin, I'm not here to judge you, and I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to meet you, your daughter." She left an impression. Helen's shoulders slumped, not from fatigue but surrender, as if the shame she'd fought to hide had finally caught up. "I didn't know she'd go," she murmured. "She told me you were sick," Andrew said gently. "I am. It's not contagious. It's pneumonia. I didn't get treatment in time. No insurance. I've been trying to keep working through it." Her voice cracked. She coughed into her elbow, the effort in every word unmistakable. "I understand," Andrew said. "Would it be all right if I came in?" "Just for a few minutes." Helen hesitated, then opened the door wider. The apartment was small but tidy. Not much to show in terms of wealth, but everything was cared for. A couple of folding chairs, a patched-up couch, and taped to the walls, with painter's tape, were dozens of Sarah's drawings. Andrew scanned them silently. Some were from the notebook. Others were new. Scenes of laundry days, soup shared on the couch, walks in the rain beneath a shared umbrella. "Your daughter's very talented," he said quietly. Helen shrugged modestly. "She draws to forget, or maybe to remember things better than they were." They both sat at the small table. He placed the notebook down between them. She opened it slowly, visibly worn out. "I didn't know she took this," she said softly. "She must have stayed up all night working on it." "She told me you used to sing," Andrew offered, his voice gentle. Helen looked down, embarrassed. That was before the noise in life got louder than the music. Andrew nodded. He didn't push. The silence said what words didn't. The late nights, the missed meals, the exhaustion, the isolation, and the love still woven through it all. He turned to one of the pages, a drawing of Helen sweeping a dim room, lit by a single beam of sunlight. She called this one Cleaning Sadness. Helen smiled faintly, eyes wet. "I didn't know she named them." He turned to another. Helen in a yellow dress, holding hands with Sarah, both smiling. "She draws what she hopes for," Helen said. "Not what is." Andrew met her eyes. "That may be the most hopeful thing I've heard in a long time." They sat quietly again. Then he asked, "Why this job? Why Ross Enterprises?" Helen ran a hand through her hair. "Because it felt solid. Because I didn't want my daughter to watch me fall again. I've scrubbed floors, folded towels, run registers, dealt with customers, all without losing my patience. I don't have a degree, but I have drive, I have experience, and I have compassion. And yeah, maybe a little desperation too." Andrew nodded slowly. "Desperation doesn't disqualify you. It means you have something real at stake." Helen looked away, tears falling. "That's what most people forget." Andrew tapped the notebook gently. "This may not be a resume by traditional standards, but it tells me more about you than 1,000 polished words ever could." Helen smiled through her tears. "Sarah's the brave one. I tried to hide everything from her this morning, but she always sees more than I think." Andrew leaned back. He didn't know if the rules applied anymore, because in this apartment, with its cracked walls and soft drawings, he saw something no executive, boardroom had ever shown him. Grace under pressure, quiet strength, humanity. He stood. "I'll be honest with you, Helen," he said. "I don't think the position we originally posted is the right fit for you." Helen flinched, bracing for rejection. "But I think you're right for something even more important." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I'll explain soon. For now, just rest. Take care of yourself. And Sarah," he turned to the girl, who had been watching silently from the couch, legs crossed, eyes wide. "Thank you for telling me the truth, Sarah," he said. She nodded solemnly, as if her mission was complete. And as Andrew walked out into the hallway, the fading daylight hitting his face, he realized something strange. It had taken a 5-year-old and a spiral notebook to remind him what a resume was supposed to be. Not a record of success, but a window into character. The next morning arrived cold and overcast, the kind of grey that seeps into everything. Inside apartment 3B, Helen sat at the edge of the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her breath faintly visible in the air, leaking through the drafty window. Sarah had just left for school, her backpack snug on her shoulders, a folded lunch bag in hand. As always, she had turned around for one last look before walking down the hallway. Helen kept her eyes on the door long after it had closed. 30 minutes later, there was a knock. Light, respectful. Helen stood slowly, adjusting her sweater, and opened the door. Standing there was Andrew Ross, again, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a small brown bag. "I brought breakfast," he said simply. She stepped aside to let him in. This time, she was ready to talk. They sat at the kitchen table. The surface was worn and peeling, but it held a kind of quiet dignity, the kind built by years of listening to whispered worries and late-night plans. Andrew set the food down gently, 2 muffins, a banana, and a few napkins. "You didn't have to," Helen said softly. I know, he replied. That's why I did. A moment passed. You came back, she said. I told Sarah I would. She talks about you a lot, more than I expected for someone she just met. She didn't come in with numbers or buzzwords. She came with the truth. That doesn't happen often. Helen nodded, staring into her cup. Her hands trembled slightly from the cold. Andrew leaned in gently. Helen, I want to know your story, not the résumé version, the part no one ever asks about. Helen hesitated, then met his eyes. Are you sure? Yes, so she began. I didn't always live here, she said, motioning around the small apartment. I had a different life once, suburbs, marriage, stability. I worked part-time at a community center. Raised Sarah. My husband Greg worked in finance. We weren't wealthy, but we were okay. Or at least I thought we were. She stared past him at the blank wall. But Greg changed. Slowly, quietly. First it was missed dinners. Then came the silence. Then the drinking. The resentment. By the time I realized how far we had drifted, he was already gone. Emotionally. The final blow came when he walked out, right after Sarah got pneumonia. She was 3, Andrew's expression darkened. He left during her illness? Helen nodded. He said he couldn't handle the pressure, that he needed to find himself, and just like that, he was gone, no note. Just a voicemail saying not to expect anything more. She took a breath. I had no family nearby, no savings. Rent was already overdue. The hospital bills came fast. I sold our furniture piece by piece. First the couch, then the table. Eventually a friend of a friend helped me find this place. I started cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at night. Sarah learned to eat dinner alone with a coloring book. Andrew stayed quiet, listening. She never complained, Helen said. Even when we had to move into a motel after an eviction, she thought it was a vacation. Drew a castle on the wall with a crayon, told me we were queens. Her voice trembled, but she held back the tears. There were nights I didn't eat so she could. Days I lied to keep her believing. I told her we'd go to the zoo when rent was due. Promised birthdays I couldn't afford. But I never stopped showing up. Andrew swallowed. You carried all of it. I had no choice. Did he ever reach out? Her father? Helen shook her head. Not once. Not for birthdays. Not even when Sarah got sick again last year. It's like he never existed. There was silence. Helen took another sip. You see, Mr. Ross, people like me don't end up in companies like yours. Not because we're not capable, but because we get filtered out before. We even make it to the front door. One missed call, one shift we can't cover, shoes that don't match the carpet, and we're out. Andrew nodded. I used to believe in filters, until your daughter walked into my office and made me realize how many good people we dismiss because we're measuring the wrong things. Helen offered a faint smile. She's a light, she said, even when the rest of the world goes dark. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was real. Andrew looked at her. What keeps you going, Helen? After everything? She turned to the cloudy window. Her, she whispered, and the hope that one day she'll remember the strength, not the struggle. That she'll be able to say, my mom tried, even if all I leave her is this apartment and second-hand shoes. Andrew glanced at the notebook still resting on the table, then back at her. You've already given her more than most kids ever get, he said quietly. You gave her a reason to believe in people. Helen smiled. This time there were no tears, just warmth. She gave me that first. Andrew stood, placing the empty cup down. Helen, I'll be honest. You're overqualified to clean offices, and deeply under-recognized for everything you've done alone. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. I want to offer you something different, not the job you applied for. Helen looked at him confused. What do you mean? A leadership role. Something that values your life experience, not just your work history. She stared at him, unsure if she had heard right. I'm not looking for charity, she said. This isn't charity. It's acknowledgement. He slid the folder across the table. Take your time. Let's talk again soon. Helen didn't open it. Not right away. She just looked at it. Then at him, for the first time in a long time. Hope didn't feel like a someday. It felt like now. The next time Andrew visited Helen's apartment, he wasn't alone. He brought someone with him, Grace Lee, The same HR director who had spoken up during the executive meeting. A woman in her early 50s, with warm eyes and a direct, no-nonsense tone. She had started at Ross Enterprises 2 decades ago as a receptionist and had risen through grit. Not titles. Andrew trusted her. More than that, he respected her ability to see people, not just resumes. They arrived just after 3 p.m. Sarah had come home from school and was coloring at the kitchen table. When she saw them through the peephole, her small voice called out from inside, delighted, "Mom! It's him again, and he brought a lady." Helen opened the door a moment later, a cardigan wrapped softly around her. She still looked tired, but something had shifted. Her eyes had more light. Her posture had more steadiness. "Come in," she said. Andrew entered first, smiling warmly. "We won't stay long, I promise." Grace stepped in behind him and offered a polite nod. "I've heard a lot about you, and about your daughter." Helen smiled with a touch of shyness. "All good things, I hope." Andrew gestured to the table. "May we?" "Of course." The apartment was just as Andrew remembered. Modest, well-kept, filled with the quiet dignity of someone who never stopped trying. The same crayon drawings still hung on the wall, but now the air felt different, expectant, like something was about to shift. Sarah stayed nearby, back to her coloring, but her ears were clearly tuned in. Andrew set a slim binder on the table and gently slid it toward Helen. She didn't open it right away. Instead, Andrew began. "We've been thinking a lot about the future of this company and the kind of leadership we want to foster." He glanced at Grace, who nodded with calm conviction, then turned back to Helen. "And I keep thinking about something your daughter said to me. She told me you help people, even when no one helps you." Helen looked down. "She sees more than she should sometimes." "That's what makes her special," Grace said gently. Andrew continued, "We're starting something new, a division that's not just about human resources. It's about people. We're calling it the Empathy Project, and I want you to lead it." Helen blinked. "Me?" "Yes," Andrew said, "you." She looked stunned. "But I don't have a degree. I haven't worked in an office in years. I don't even own a proper blazer." Andrew smiled. "You've built community while holding 3 jobs. You've handled emotional breakdowns, budget crises, and heartbreak, all while raising a child. I don't need you to know corporate policy. I need you to help us write new ones." Grace leaned forward. "This department will rethink how we recruit, support, and retain people, especially those with complicated personal lives, single parents, caregivers, folks returning to the workforce. We need someone who knows what that actually looks like." Helen's hands trembled slightly. "Why me?" "Because you've lived it," Andrew said, his voice gentle. "And because for too long, companies like ours have acted like those stories don't belong in the boardroom." There was a pause. Then Helen stood, not with panic but quiet resolve. She walked to the wall, to the drawings Sarah had made, her cooking breakfast, holding Sarah under an umbrella, dancing with a broom in hand. "Life in crayon? All I've done," she said softly, "is survive." Andrew stood too. "And that's exactly why you're ready." Helen looked to Sarah, who was watching them closely now, her eyes wide and shining. Then she turned back and placed her hand on the binder. "I'll need help." "You'll have a mentor," Grace said without hesitation. "And a team." Helen opened the cover. On the first page, in bold position, Director of People and Culture Status, Executive. Level salary, competitive plus. Full benefits, start date, flexible. "Based on your health readiness," Helen inhaled sharply. "I don't know how to lead a department." Andrew replied, "You've led a life harder than most departments. We'll teach you the rest." A tear slipped down Helen's cheek. "I just want Sarah to be proud." Andrew's voice softened. "She already is, but now she doesn't have to carry everything alone." Grace added, "And neither do you." The day Helen walked into Ross Enterprises as an executive for the first time, she wore a navy blazer borrowed from a neighbor, a pair of slacks that didn't quite fit, and the softest scarf Sarah had picked for her that morning. She clutched her ID badge, heart pounding. When the elevator doors opened, Danielle, Andrew's longtime chief of staff, stood waiting. "Ms. Martin," she said with a smile, "welcome." Helen smiled back, nerves visible. "I still can't believe I'm here." Danielle chuckled. "You're not just here. You're meant to be here." She guided Helen to the 16th floor, a newly renovated space. The walls were lined with artwork made by employees' children. A corner had become a reading nook. There was a toy bin and a quiet lounge space, and in the center a glass office. On the door, a new nameplate, Helen Martin, Director, People and Culture, Helen, stopped in her tracks, breath-catching. Grace handed her a folder. "Let's go rewrite the rules." And they did. Over the next few weeks, Helen listened more than she spoke. She walked the floors, greeted janitors and executives alike, and hosted open hours where anyone, regardless of role, could come talk. She asked the questions no one had ever dared. Ask, what's something you wish someone asked you here? How has work affected your personal life? What would it take for this job to feel humane? People cried. People opened up. People felt heard. Sarah visited often. Her new drawings began decorating. Helen's office, say they called it the empathy office. Sarah sometimes colored in the corner while her mom sat in meetings, discussing childcare policies, flexible hours, mental health resources, and emergency leave. People stopped calling it HR. They started calling it the heart. And Andrew, he visited often, not to check on KPIs or reports, but to remind himself what change looked like. It all started in a 400-square-foot apartment, with a little girl too small for the elevator button, and a mother too tired to believe she still mattered, and yet they changed everything. When the first internal report landed on Andrew's desk, it didn't feel like just another quarterly update. There were no flashy charts, no sleek buzzwords, no carefully polished executive summary crafted to impress investors. Just a simple folder, one that had passed through many hands, from junior staff to floor supervisors, to HR and finally to Helen, collecting scraps of truth along the way. Notes, quotes, metrics, observations, pieces of a shifting culture, stitched into something more alive than any spreadsheet. The first page wasn't numbers. It was a handwritten paragraph in pen. "We don't cry in stairwells anymore. Now we talk." That alone is everything. Andrew read it twice before turning to the actual data. And the numbers? They spoke more clearly than any speech he had ever delivered. Employee turnover down from 31% to 5.4% in less than a year. Productivity up 42%, especially in departments that adopted the new flexible guidelines. Sick leave abuse reports down 63%. Voluntary feedback submission rate up over 300%. But it wasn't just efficiency, it was trust. It was proof that emotional safety had created a workplace where people didn't just perform, they cared. Not out of fear, but out of ownership. In marketing, a junior designer had quietly stepped into a leadership role, not through promotion, but because her team naturally turned to her for guidance and support. When their official manager withdrew during a personal crisis, Helen saw it. Within a week, she created a lateral mentorship initiative, allowing people to lead and be recognized, no matter their title. The same designer eventually received a formal offer for promotion. She accepted under one condition: "I still need Fridays off to care for my mom." The company said yes, because that's who they were now. They didn't just manage, they listened. In the warehouse, safety compliance had always been a challenge, not because workers were careless, but because they felt invisible, until Helen's team held a bilingual listening session. Afterward, signage was redesigned in plain language. Breaks were restructured so people didn't have to choose between rest and reputation. Safety protocols were rewritten with input from the workers themselves. Incident reports dropped 78% in 6 months. But more powerful than that, people started saying good morning again. No report tracked that. But it mattered. Even the boardroom changed. Initially, there was resistance, caution, doubt, the usual demands. ROI, forecasts, projections. So Helen invited them, not to a meeting, to a day on the floor. Each executive spent one afternoon shadowing a non-managerial employee. They watched, listened, ate in the cafeteria, sat in meetings where they weren't the loudest voice. Some fumbled, others stiffened, but none left unchanged. One finance director exited. A team huddled and whispered, "I think I've been building walls with the wrong materials." Another, long known for being distant, was later spotted helping an admin assemble a standing desk, one she had requested 3 times before anyone noticed. When asked why, he simply said, because no one listened the first 3 times. And then came the letters, folded, tucked under Helen's door, hidden inside Sarah's crayon box, from janitors, from night shift staff, from people who never imagined their handwriting would end up on an executive desk. One read, I stopped taking pills to stay awake for doubles. Now I take walks on my breaks and call my sister. Thank you. Another, I told my boss I was trans. For the first time in my life, I didn't regret being honest. And another, scrawled, messy, heartfelt. I didn't think a place like this could feel like home. But now I go home and tell my kids I work somewhere that cares. Sarah became part of the company's rhythm too. She came after school always with a drawing, a story, or a smile. People knew her name, greeted her in hallways, high-fived her as she skipped past meeting rooms. Her latest artwork, a giant tree made entirely of thumbprints, covered an entire wall on the 16th floor. Every employee who visited was invited to add their print. No obligation, no pressure. Still, everyone did. At the heart of the tree, side by side in dark green, Helen's and Sarah's prints. It wasn't decoration. It was proof that something could grow where no one thought it could. Of course, not everything was perfect. Some leaders resisted. A few left. Some departments moved slower than others. But the company wasn't pretending anymore. Helen made sure of that. In one tense meeting, a manager muttered, "We're coddling people too much." Helen didn't argue. She simply slid a resignation letter across the table. It was from a single parent, one of their best performers. The note ended with, "I don't need more money. I need to feel like my life matters to someone here." The room went silent. Helen didn't fill the pause. She let it speak. Andrew watched all of this with growing wonder. He visited the 16th floor regularly now. Not to lead, to listen. One afternoon, he saw Sarah drawing in Helen's office. She looked up, waved, then returned to her page. He peeked over her shoulder. A picture of the Ross Enterprises building, wrapped in a ribbon like a gift. In the corner, a small note. "Thank you for giving my mom back her smile." Andrew turned away, pretending to check his phone. But that drawing stayed with him longer than any award ever had. Because no profit margin or news. Headline could compare to this: a child watching her mother rise, not just from poverty, but from invisibility. And yet, no celebration, no balloons, no press release, because there was more work to do, more employees to hear, more policies to reshape, more rooms to walk into with eyes open. Helen had always said, this isn't a revolution, it's a return to what matters, to human connection. To leadership that leads among, not above. She didn't need applause. She needed only one thing, to make sure that the next woman who walked through those doors, carrying her whole life in silence, would never again have to prove she deserved to be seen. The first request came in quietly. No formal memo, no email marked urgent, just a short note left on Helen's desk by a regional director in Boston. "Is it possible to replicate what you've built here? Even just a little." She read it 3 times. There was something fragile in the wording, as if the person asking didn't quite believe they deserved something better, only hoped it might be allowed. Helen folded the note and set it next to Sarah's newest drawing, a crayon heart taped to her coffee mug. She didn't answer the question right away, because she knew. The answer wasn't simple. You can't replicate empathy in a spreadsheet. You can't standardize safety. You can't franchise healing. But maybe, just maybe, you can plant something and let it grow. Within 2 weeks, the calls started. Phoenix, Seattle, Charlotte, Austin managers, team leads, HR directors, people who had visited the 16th floor or simply heard whispers from colleagues, started reaching out. Not asking for policies, asking for guidance. How did it start? What were the first steps? What if our team pushes back? What if we're the ones who are scared? Helen didn't send them slide decks or strategy briefs. She sent them stories. Stories of a woman who cried in a hallway and was never asked to explain. Of a janitor who got a seat at the operations table because he knew workflow better than anyone else. Of Sarah, always Sarah, who taught them to ask better questions with crayons and quiet presence. The stories spread like sparks across dry land. Andrew gathered the board. He presented the data, the retention gains, the productivity spikes, the media buzz. Then he set the graphs aside and said, "We've remembered what makes a company worth walking into. Now we have the chance to do something bigger, not by scaling a brand, but by trusting people to humanize what they touch." The boardroom for once was still. And then, for the first time in years, they voted unanimously. Not for one new branch, but for 5. Not with pressure, but with purpose. Each one would begin with something simple. Listening week, no performance metrics, no productivity demands. Just time to ask, what does this place feel like to you? What's missing that you're afraid to say? What would make you feel safe here? Helen traveled to every location. Not as a corporate figurehead, but as herself, with a thermos Sarah had covered in stickers, a notebook half filled with names and questions. She sat in folding chairs, shared meals with staff, walked slowly through break rooms, touching the edges of silence. She asked, "Who here cries in their car before making dinner?" Hands rose, not all, but enough. In Boston, a young manager proposed a slow start hour. On Mondays, space to decompress before diving into deadlines. In Phoenix, a receptionist asked for therapy access in Spanish. The answer wasn't just yes. It launched a recruitment drive for bilingual therapists. In Seattle, a cold break room became a reflection room with lamps, journals, and one chair by a window. None of it came from a manual. It came from trust, from the roots Helen had quietly nurtured, now blooming beyond anything she could have predicted. Back home, Sarah watched the walls in Helen's office fill with new maps, new photos, team circles, children's artwork, handprint murals. One night, as Helen tucked her in, Sarah whispered, "Do you think one day the whole world will feel like the 16th floor?" Helen paused. She wanted to say yes, but she knew. Change doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives on Tuesdays, in hallway pauses. In the moment someone finally exhales, after holding it in too long. So she kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're planting the seeds." Critics called it a phase, a feel-good PR stunt, unsustainable. But they hadn't been to Charlotte, where a senior exec sat cross-legged beside an employee whose grandmother had just passed, or seen a team pause a project not because it failed, but because someone had said, "I don't feel okay today," or watched someone stay just because someone remembered their child's name. Andrew watched from the background. He let Helen lead, let the branches form their own rhythms. But one afternoon, during a leadership retreat in Austin, he asked Helen to walk with him. No cameras, no press, just trees, just gravel beneath their feet. "I used to think legacy was about endurance," he said. Helen looked over. "And now?" Andrew smiled. "I think it's about softness, the kind that survives long after you're gone." She grinned. "Sarah told me you cry now." He laughed. "Often, she broke something in me, and I've never been more grateful." They stopped walking. The sun filtered through the leaves. Andrew asked quietly, "Do you think this will last?" Helen picked up a leaf, cradled it in her hand, then said, "It will last, as long as someone is willing to feel first." Months later, the 16th floor was no longer just a floor. It was a language, a pulse, a way of leading. Let's do it the Helen way. What would Sarah see if she walked in here? Have we made room for someone's hard day? Near Helen's window, a glass jar began filling with folded slips of paper. No one knew who started it. Each note simply said, "Today I felt seen." It was late. The building was quiet. The 16th floor glowed softly with desk lamps and silence. Sarah slept curled in a chair, arms around her backpack, crayons scattered nearby. Helen sat beside her, still, present, breathing. Across the room, Andrew stepped off the elevator, no briefcase, just tea, and the face of a man who had said less, but felt more. He sat, looked at Sarah, then whispered, "She has no idea what she started, does she?" Helen shook her head gently. Maybe it's better that way. They sat in silence, and in that silence, everything lived. Later that night, as Sarah was carried to the car, as Andrew walked the halls alone, he passed quiet cubicles and dimmed screens, but he could still feel the voices, the laughter, the questions. When did this place start to matter again? When did we start believing care was allowed? He stepped into the elevator, saw his reflection, older, but finally whole, not the polished CEO, just a man who had once stood in a small apartment, holding a crayon-streaked notebook, and said yes to something he didn't yet understand. At home, Helen tucked Sarah into bed. "Was I in the way today?" Sarah murmured. Helen smiled, kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart, you were the way." The next morning, a janitor found a note taped to the back of the break room door. It wasn't signed. It wasn't official. But it read, "If you're having a hard day, stay a little longer. Sometimes healing arrives late, but it still arrives." Someone copied it, pinned it to the wall, printed it on mugs, read it aloud in morning huddles, because no one knew who wrote it. But everyone knew what it meant. And for one long, quiet moment, they all listened. Sometimes the greatest changes don't begin in boardrooms. They begin with a child who refuses to accept silence, a mother who keeps showing up even when the world tells her not to, and a man who chooses to listen when it would be easier to look away. This story isn't just about one company. It's about the quiet revolution that starts when we stop measuring people by what they lack and start seeing who they are. So now ask yourself, what would your workplace look like if empathy sat at the head of the table? And more importantly, who in your life has been waiting to be seen not as a role, but as a human? If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what keeps this channel and these stories alive.